Alright, so welcome back to the channel, this tactical intellectual channel. The topic of discussion is the Ainu tribe, of course, and my objective is to just provide some background information on these people, their forefathers, different groups that came in and affected these people, the Ainu, that is. So let's go ahead and start everything up and enjoy this presentation, hopefully. To me, when I think and ponder over all of the sources I have used, especially on page 243 of Roland B. Dixon's book, The Racial History of Man, this is talking about Asia here, but as you can see, it's saying and is actually admitting that from India to Kamchatka, Russia, that there was dolichocephalic, dark-skinned Negro populations that were a blend of Proto-Australo Negroes and Proto-non-Australo Negroes that inhabited the area. So I'm very perplexed when I see this here. Not to get too technical, but just check out these comments right here. The first one, it says that it's amazing how the Finnish people appear Asiatic but with Baltic/Scandinavian features, and the Ainu people appear European but with Asiatic features. Both, yeah, okay. But when they say European, they mean what we know as white or Caucasian, what I call Palito or Stancadian on this platform. Let's look at the second one. It says, this guy says, I was in a Marine station in Japan in the mid-90s. We did a 2-week training exercise on Hokkaido. We had a night out in Sapporo, and I noticed how many of the locals were taller, stockier, and well, just plain more Caucasian looking than the mainland Japanese. And I remembered hearing about the Ainu assimilation cuts both ways. Okay, so you see what he believes in. The third one, okay, they look far more white than the thumbnail would suggest. I wonder if this is for political reasons. And then this person down below says, Ainu have European light ancestry. They are not pure Jomon. And then the fourth screenshot here says, Ainu having blue eyes or that kind, remarks suggesting they were of Caucasian origin are completely debunked by the recent most advanced genetic tests. They were just other kind of ancient Jomon people who were completely of Asian origin. Now, the background on this, why he phrases it like this, because somebody further up was like, hey man, they noticed the blue eyes and gray eyes, and in their opinion they looked like modern day European people. So I should have actually showed that, but I did get the comments from this video here, 15 fascinating facts about the Ainu, Japan's indigenous people, from the Untold History channel, and I will leave a link to this in my description. Let's go ahead and move on to the next set of comments here. All right, so what you see is the Metatron's channel, and it's entitled, Where Are the Black People in Shogun? Is this a woke article? Now, what is this? Well, this is in reference to the article here that you see by Spivey, and he posed a question about the presence of melanated people in the TV show and why there was a lack of, I guess, representation. And in his article, he had mentioned the Ainu people. So that's what this whole Metatron channel presentation is all about here. He's doing a deep dive on the article, and my thing is I want to check out the comments, because you got to look at the audience of Metatron. That kind of, actually there is no kind of, they are very ignorant. They come across information and feel that they are experts and can speak on anything. Any differing view is to be discarded. That's just how they are, but don't take my word for it. Let's go ahead and look into it. Check out this guy here. He says, I've seen pictures of the Ainu. They are not black. They have a darker skin tone, but they aren't black. I'm sure they'd be insulted to be called something they're not. These culture vultures should be ashamed of themselves. And then let's look at beneath. The hairy Ainu of the north were suntanned when upper class valued lighter skin and had servants holding parasols when outdoors. And let's look at Scarlet. You're right, they're not. They're obviously indigenous Asian people. They're not even close to being African black. Not even close. And check this person out right here. Yes, the Ainu are an ethnic group comprising related indigenous peoples who are native to northern Japan, not sub-Saharan Africa. Now, let's look at the issue with all of this. This guy, he's saying that he's seen pictures of them. Hadn't seen enough. He said they have a darker skin tone, but they aren't black. What? Then this would perplex me right here. I'm sure they'd be insulted to be called something they're not. Then he talked about culture vultures. Okay, whatever. Then this is the thing that kills me right here. They always confuse black with African and sub-Saharan African. And it's these two latter people here, Scarlet and Kenneth C. So let's go ahead and go to some more comments. Now, I do like what Lapis Lazuli 578 says. Strange that you felt the need to say they would be insulted. Yeah, I do concur with that sentiment there. Then, all right, let's look at this person, Bella Torde Day. All right, they are Caucasian white. All right. And then this person right here, I'm gonna just skip this person, soft bread soft, and let's go to the last one, Jaku Bullock or Blulik. He says Ainu are close to Siberian tribes and these are not black. They have darker skin as Native Americans have darker skin. Okay, whatever. So let's go ahead and move on to two Japanese, Shin and Ken. We're gonna look at Shin's comments here, and he says, "Thank you. I am Japanese and I am delighted to hear your analysis. As you mentioned, Yasuke is the only black person I know from those days. There may have been other black people, but the episode where Nobunaga and others were surprised about his blackness and tried to wash off the ink from his skin shows how rare they were. However, I often hear claims like Japanese were black, which frustrates me a lot. In my opinion, it is a disrespectful attitude towards the culture and history of other civilizations. I want people to be humble enough to study and accept other cultures as they are. By the way, it's great that Japanese people had accepted Yasuke so well. Perhaps they did not have the idea of racial discrimination back then." And then some little emoji. Why are you frustrated, Shin? I mean, come on, bro. You gotta know your history, G. Dang. Alright, so let's go ahead and go to Ken. He says, "As a Japanese, I thank you. I will try to keep it short and simple, but Saku Noe, whatever, origins are clearly documented in official histories, and he is not of African descent." There we go again, as is obvious. The Ainu are not of African descent. There you go again. Nobody's saying that, Ken. As for proverbs, I have never heard of such proverbs. To begin with, there is a Japanese proverb, and we're gonna close it off right here. But listen, man, this is the problem here. People are misconstruing this entire argument. They're just dropping points of validity, and they're just running off of emotions and pride and narrative and, did I say cultural pride? They are mistaking that skin color with they're going straight back to recent African ancestry. And to my Africans on here, we're not saying anything negative towards you. Matter of fact, we're propping things up, and I'm gonna talk about that later on. Just a disclaimer, man, because people get things misconstrued and twisted on here. You know, they read too much into stuff and then they always go sideways or left rather than asking more questions to clarify. So let's go ahead and go to more comments here. So the next one is a warning. It's a cautionary tale. Check out Gunnar Reiser, and he says, I can reassure anyone who isn't black that sees this. It's only African Americans who claim black origins of almost every culture. As an African, I know my history and culture. Huh? A show based on feudal Japan should have nothing to do with black people, and this is just ridiculous to think about. What, bro, what? Hey man, listen, there's not much to say about it. I can tell he's very conciliatory, but this is what I see here.
Toby, be good for your hand, boss. Good for your hand, master.
That's all right, Toby. That's all right. You be a good field hand, and you can stay here.
Ah, Toby, stay. Toby, stay. Toby, be good now. Toby, be real good.
Yeah, so just don't be like this guy here, man. Don't be a super appeaser. Your main skill or trait in life should not be to placate other people. Do not be an adherent to misinformation and a cohort to liars. Don't do that. That's a cautionary tale right here. Now, this guy beneath Fertazile 8035, check out what he says. Very informative video. They started with they started with rewriting of European history. What? Did we? No, we didn't. Moved to Egypt. Come on now, it's too easy. And now they want to branch out into Asia. It's disturbing. Hey man, well, the truth is disturbing, so I cannot bring myself to get upset with how this guy feels. I mean, just let him be. He's gonna have this viewpoint regardless if you show him a massive amount of information and, you know, deep dives and whatever else you need. I mean, he's not going to be swayed. Who cares, man? It's ironic, the stuff that he says, rewriting history, now, you know, Egypt and branching off into Asia. I mean, if he only knew, man. So let's look at this guy, Ben Dalton, 5221. He says, even including the Ainu people from the original article, there were not black people in Japan in 1600 or the year 1600. The Ainu aren't very dark skinned, hardly any different than what we think of as traditional Japanese people. Plus, the Ainu were indigenous to the northern island of Hokkaido, plus the Kuril Islands and Sakhalin Island. Given that the vast majority of Shogun takes place in the area around Kyoto and Edo, Tokyo, it would follow that you would not have any Ainu in this story. An analogy would be if I wrote a story about people first settled in Virginia and all of the settings for the story were in the area between Richmond and Fredericksburg, and someone got pissed because they wondered why there weren't any Cajuns from Louisiana in the story. Well, you know what? Regarding the top half of his paragraph here, I disagree fully, point blank, and that's easy to break down. But you know what? The bottom half, I can see where he's coming from because he's been specific when it comes to the group, the tribal affiliations. Yeah, I can see his point there. You know, with the Ainu, they weren't even in that area. But let's go ahead and discuss something regarding the first half before he got into his analogy. So let's go ahead and go to the book, Racial History of Man, and let's look at something. So earlier in this video presentation, I was on page 243 of the book, The Racial History of Man, and we already established that the presence of Proto-Australo Negroes and non-Proto-Australo Negroes were all around, and the naturally occurring blend of these people were around in great numbers. So let's look at the second full paragraph on page 243, and it says, although this blend of Proto-Australo Negro and Proto-non-Australo Negro types formed everywhere the fundamental basis of the population of the borderlands, two other types were also present. Okay, so they say Caspian and all of that, and then let's look at this. It says, sweeping through the Zungaria and over the upland, they came into China and Manchuria and passed by way of Korea into Japan, where their presence in Neolithic times has been recently established. Another branch seems to have followed down the great rivers and mountain ranges which spread fan-wise from eastern Tibet, so penetrating into farther India, from whence they passed on into Indonesia and the Pacific. All right, and then let's look at the main point right here. So let's go down a little bit. Okay, so it says that these individuals of strikingly European features with light hair and eyes and rosy cheeks are sometimes found. Now this is the main point on page 244 here. It says, the other of these early types present in the borderlands was the Palealpine, in regard to which, however, several different problems arise. At the present day, this type exhibits two forms strikingly different in outward appearance, yet closely similar in skeletal characteristics. One, which forms the large and often preponderant part of the population of southeastern Asia, is short, with a light yellowish skin, straight hair, little prognathism, and is marked by a variable and sometimes considerable development of the mongoloid eye. The other, the Negrito, surviving today in small fragments only in the Andaman Islands and the Malay Peninsula, is shorter in stature, black-skinned, woolly-haired, and rather prognatic. Both groups, in spite of their great outward differences, are round-headed, high-skulled, and broad-nosed, and thus must be classed as belonging to the Palealpine type. To group together as members of a single type two peoples outwardly so distinct on the basis merely of their agreement in respect to the three criteria here chosen seems, to say at the least, venturesome. Yet, I believe the action is defensible, its justification and the discussion of the problems involved, however, must be deferred to the final chapter, when the similar dilemma in regard to the African pygmies can also be considered. For the time being, I shall simply beg that question and refer to the short Negro brachycephalic peoples as the Negrito branch of the Palealpine type. There you have it. I mean, I would like to elaborate, but there's no need. As you can see, there are branches, but who were the original people in that area? We already answered that. Let's continue though. Let's drop down. It says, how widely too they were distributed is very hard to say. The fact that short Negro survivals are reported to have been found in the extreme southwest of China makes it possible that the Negrito once had a wider distribution than was at one time thought. Now let's look at this part here. As a result of this Palealpine immigration, the older dolichocephalic population, the Negro population, was over great areas dispossessed of the better lands which were taken by the probably agricultural invaders, and was either forced off the mainland to settle in Indonesia or driven into the higher uplands and mountain regions, beginning thus the curious horizontal stratification of racial types which is now so marked over considerable parts of the southeast of the continent. We should get the gist of what is being said here, and let me throw this out here. When it said the mongoloid eye, of course, that's speaking about the epicantic eye fold that a lot of Asians have. I definitely know that saying mongoloid eye is very, very outdated, and it could be very offensive too. So let me throw that out there. All right, so we're going to go to the reaction part next, and here we go. So we have this video on the Ainu, and I'm going to let it play. I will interject when a major point is made or a noteworthy point is made. Let's go ahead and start it up.
Hello, and welcome back to another installment of Trey the Explainer. And I know I said the next video would probably be a cryptid one, but I'm kind of pressed for time right now, so I thought I'd like to try to make a short-ish video on something I found pretty interesting, and in doing so, this will be the first of my human evolution and diversity videos. The diversity of humanity throughout the world is something I've always found very interesting. Although we share a fairly recent common ancestor and we are all Homo sapiens sapiens,
Why do people like to take photos near nude people? Come on, man. You could have blocked it out better than that.
we have nonetheless developed into very unique populations with very different physical appearances as a result of many factors, such as natural selection to our corresponding environments. And today, I'd like to examine one of these unique populations that most people haven't even heard of, and talk about their pretty mysterious origins as well as their relationship with other human groups. Now, I want you to look at this picture of this man, and guess where you think he came from. Well, if you guessed European or Middle Eastern or North African or anything like that, you might be surprised to learn that this man is in fact Japanese. This man belongs to the Ainu tribe of Japan, and as you might have noticed, he and his people tend to not fit into our normal classifications of Japanese or even Asian, taking a very almost European looking appearance.
Remember those comments that I showcased? That is actually the ideas that are in their heads. They think that they were the first peoples, that they're the standards, that they're indigenous and everything. There's a lot of foolishness, but let's go ahead and get the facts from this video here.
Full-blooded Ainu people tend to be lighter skinned, hairier, sporting long beards and hair, and have different eye and facial shape compared to other inhabitants of East Asia. They appear to be very distinct from their neighbors and seem to stand against our traditional classifications of race. And this is no mistake, as the Ainu were a conundrum for anthropologists for centuries. A book written in the 1940s, so get ready for some somewhat outdated racial classifications, describes the Ainu in great detail. Many have wavy hair. Their skins are generally reported to be light brown. Old people are often found to be as white as a Western man. The Ainu have broad faces and large sunken eyes, which are generally horizontal and of the so-called European type. Eyes of the Mongolian type are hardly found among them. Due to this unique appearance, it was largely believed that the Ainu belonged to a branch of Europeans that were displaced, but this again couldn't be further from the actual truth. So, who are these people exactly, and where did they come from? Well, the answer to that question is a long and complex one, and tells the tale of an ancient and almost forgotten lineage. Firstly, I should explain who the Ainu people are. Today, the Ainu are a very small ethnic group that inhabits mostly the northern islands in the Japanese archipelago, specifically Hokkaido, as well as some territories claimed by Russia nearby. Officially, their population is currently in the 20,000s, but odds are this is an underestimate, and there are perhaps hundreds of thousands of people completely unaware of their Ainu heritage walking around in Japan today.
So I do have a few videos on Russia, and it does speak on the I guess the ethnic makeup of the original peoples. So let's go ahead and proceed with the video. But hold on, before I do that, check those videos out.
The Ainu possess their own culture that is quite different than what we would consider traditional Japanese culture. The men never shave their beards after a certain age and sport flowing beards and mustaches. Ainu women tattoo their mouths and arms and wear garments covered in geometric designs and patterns. The legends of the Ainu claim that they were always the original inhabitants of the islands. The Ainu lived in this place 100,000 years before the children of the sun came.
You see that? Remember that fact right there.
Furthermore, the Ainu are not the only unique inhabitants of Japan. Chinese records during the 400 CE mention the Amishi. I know my pronunciation probably throughout this entire episode is going to be completely awful. Or the hairy people living in northeastern Japan.
Sorry to cut it off, but yeah, the Amishi. Remember that. Also, take a mental note. Let me scroll back a little bit.
.400 CE mention the Amishi. I know my pronunciation probably throughout this entire episode is going to be completely awful. Or the hairy people living in northeastern Japan, in the uncivilized lands. They were noted as having a strange physical appearance and are often described as having long beards and many of the other same characteristics used to describe the Ainu of today. Some of the Amishi tribes are said to have resisted the early Japanese emperors during the Middle Ages, often using guerrilla tactics. These Amishi are largely, if not entirely, extinct and only survive in historical records. Archaeological evidence also illustrates an ancient culture of hunter-gatherers existed in Japan in Earth's prehistory. From 14,000 BCE to 300 BCE, What is called the Jomon culture dominated Japan. These people created distinctive pottery and figurines. They appear to be culturally similar to both the Amishi and the Ainu, and were likely physically similar as well. Genetic evidence taken from Jomon skeletons shows a close relationship between the Jomon and today's Ainu.
Take note of this right here, the Jomon culture.
The relationships between the Ainu, Amishi, and the Jomon culture isn't exactly clear, as it is difficult to reconstruct their histories after such a long time, but it is clear that they were all close relatives of one another, and the Ainu and Amishi, at the very least, descended from the people of the Jomon culture. The ethnic Japanese people of today, the Yamato Japanese, are largely a mixture of the Jomon culture and the Yaoi culture. The Yaoi culture came from mainland Asia, likely originating from modern-day Korea, and it is likely they are the children of the sun, Ainu legends refer to. The agricultural Yaoi, who likely resembled what we would consider modern Asians, invaded and began colonizing Japan during the Iron Age, 300 BCE, and absorbed and overran the native population of the Jomon peoples, resulting in our modern Japanese. This is proven by genetic evidence that shows that most Japanese today have around 20% Jomon ancestry. However, not all the descendants of the Jomon intermix equally or entirely. It appears the ancestors of the Ainu and the Amishi in northern Japan resisted this intermingling more than their southern relatives, and thus largely isolated themselves culturally and genetically, and in doing so, retained many of the traits and characteristics of the Jomon.
Now, this is a common sense concept right here. Now, when it talks about, I guess, these different groups right there, you have to know that the frequency of admixture is attributed to the genetic and cultural isolation, at least partially. That's, you see the result today. So I mean, a lot of people are surprised, or they claim that it's a mysterious occurrence that we have different looking peoples of varying frequencies of this characteristic or that characteristic, and the same people of said population has, like, I guess, less traits, racial characteristics than their neighbors. But it's all about migration and intermixture.
It appears in Ainu populations, intermixing between Yaoi and other East Asian peoples did occur, but probably not as great to an extent as other populations in Japan. This explains why modern Ainu populations don't exactly look alike, some have more Jomon-blooded ancestry than others. As you can start to see with all this evidence, it is becoming clear who the Ainu people are. They are in part the descendants of the original inhabitants of Japan, essentially Japan's Native Americans or Aboriginals. The Jomon ancestors of the Ainu arrived in Japan probably during the Ice Age by crossing a now destroyed land bridge connecting Japan to the rest of Asia. Thousands of years later, the ancestors of modern Asians also arrived in Japan and began colonizing the regions themselves. They encountered these pre-existing Japanese and intermixed with them, largely watering down the unique appearance and culture of these people, and creating what we would consider the Japanese of today. Only the Ainu and other cultures which isolated themselves remain as a remnant of these ancient native Japanese people. Although most people outside of Japan have never heard of them, these ancient Aboriginal Japanese have had a large impact on Japanese culture even today.
Hey, you see that visual? That's an interesting picture right there. What they say, a picture is worth 1,000 words or more. Let me scroll back a little bit.
Original Japanese have had a large impact on Japanese culture even today. Specifically, Japanese manga and anime appear to have characters and cultures largely influenced, if not partly influenced, by the Ainu, Amishi, and Jomon. The Amishi serve as the primary inspiration for the anime Princess Mononoke, and the story depicts the last remnants of the Amishi during the expansion of the Yamato Empire in the Middle Ages. Additionally, I think a case can be made for them being the partial influence to both the Ishvalan and Fullmetal Alchemist, and Krapka and his tribe, the almost extinct Kurtka clan in Hunter x Hunter, judging from his style of clothing and other similarities. And it's a shame that the funny History of Japan video basically glazed over this period in Japanese history, as I find it very interesting.
Alright, so here's the main event. Nobody cares about the manga right now. That's an interesting game night questionnaire type of thing, but this is the main point of this entire reaction right here. Let's go ahead and proceed.
But still, none of this explains why they appear so different physically and genetically from other Asian groups. Well, in order to understand this, we need to talk about haplogroups. Haplogroups, and I am simplifying here, are a collection of genes that are typically inherited together from a single parent. This is called a haplotype. A certain combination of these inherited genes and alleles will only appear in people who are descendants from this specific single parent. This allows geneticists to track the line of descent of a person and figure out their relationship to other people. For instance, because the Y chromosome is only passed from a father to a son, we can use a combination of certain genes which will remain virtually the same when passed from father to son on the Y chromosome to determine the patrilineal line of a person. The son of his son and his son's son should all have a similar combination of genes regardless of who the mother is. Additionally, we can find out if your great-great-great etc. grandfather also fathered other sons, as well as your own family line. The sons of his son should have a similar, if not identical, haplotype to you, and this allows us to see if you two are in fact related. A similar thing can be done using the mitochondrial DNA of one's mother to determine the matrilineal line of a person. Haplogroups, because of this, are incredibly useful in determining human ancestry, and is often the primary tool used for ancestry websites like 23andMe and Ancestry.com. Haplogroups can be used to determine the ancestry of thousands if not millions of people, and can go back thousands of years and countless generations. Typically in human evolution they are labeled in broad categories by using letters A, B, C, etc. Mutations picked up over time can create subgroupings of a line within a line. In short, this method allows us to create a family tree of all of humanity, and all of life if you want to go that far. Now, human Y chromosome DNA haplogroupings are especially significant when we're trying to figure out the ancestry of the Ainu and Jomon and their relation to other peoples. When the Y chromosome data of these people were tested, no relation to European populations was found, and little relation to even other Asian populations was found as well. It was discovered that members of the Ainu population mainly belong to the Y haploid group D. This Y haploid group is found in many people in the Japanese archipelago, but occur most frequently in Ainu populations to the north. This is interesting to say the least, as basically all other East Asians belong to the Y haploid group C, O, or N. The only other places in the world where Y haploid group D is found outside of Japan is in Tibet and Burma, and in very light frequencies scattered throughout Central Asia. And, most intriguing of all, in extremely high frequencies in the Andamanese, native inhabitants of the Andaman Islands. The Andaman Islands is a very isolated island chain that sits in the Bay of Bengal. The indigenous people of these islands have had very little contact with other cultures for thousands of years, and it is believed that they have been isolated from the mainland for at least 20,000 years.
Do you see, is it starting to become clearer? Not yet. Okay, well, stay tuned.
Among them is the Sentinelese, which are just one of probably around 100 uncontacted peoples around the globe. These people have had basically no contact with the outside world, and essentially still live a hunter-gatherer lifestyle essentially unchanged since the Ice Age, completely unaware of the world that exists off their island. What's bizarre is when you look at the physical appearance of these people and compare them with the Ainu. The two share basically no physical resemblance, despite being the closest living relatives to one another in their patrilineal line. In this respect, Y haploid group D is very mysterious and strange. Unlike the other groupings, the geographic distributions of the group are very distinct and widely dispersed. It has a high frequency on the Andaman Islands, but curiously has no frequency whatsoever in coastal areas surrounding the islands. It is found in Japan in high frequencies, but can't really be found elsewhere close nearby. Furthermore, it is interesting to learn that Y haploid D group's closest relatives are again not Asian or Indian, but are in fact members of Y haploid group E, which is found almost exclusively in Africa. So these members of Y haploid group D are also closest related to native Africans as well, meaning Europeans and East Asians are closely related to each other than they are to them. Literally, what the heck is going on here? Well, the exact dispersal or formation of these peoples is unclear, and probably will remain so. You must remember all this occurred before men could even write, and much intermixing between different peoples has occurred since then, so it is difficult to reconstruct. But one thing is clear. Y haploid group D was a branch of humans that left Africa and broke off from the other human groups very early on, as far back as 50 to 60,000 years ago. While the ancestors of both Europeans and modern Asians were still in Africa, they had already left for greener places. The migration of humans out of Africa and into Asia was not a single event by a single group of people, but one of several independent migrations of several groups out of Africa. Among the first of these migrations to leave Africa were the haploid group Ds. Judging from the dark skin of the Andamanese, and to the lesser extent Tibeto-Burman people, as well as their close relationship to native Africans, we can infer that what I will refer to as the Ds were very dark-skinned people who migrated and dispersed into Asia 60,000 years ago, probably taking a southern route. These Paleolithic black Asians were the original human inhabitants of Asia. They inhabited both the mainland and various islands along the coast. Among these Black Asians were a branch that traveled to the Andaman Islands, and they became the Andamanese. Another branch traveled to Japan and became the Jomon culture, and it appears the light pale skin possessed by the Jomon, Amishi, and Ainu was a secondary evolution to absorb more ultraviolet light in higher latitude regions.
This whole they acquired light skin, they needed to adapt. That's shaky. I want to say spurious at best, but the main point is, he admitted the fact that there were Black Asians or melanated Asians. The original Asians were melanated. I just said the same thing in topsy-turvy order, but let's keep going.
Possibly and interestingly made independently from both Asians and Europeans. Others traveled to Tibet in Central Asia and became the ancestors of those members of D in those regions today. But if they were once so widely spread, what happened to these haploid D people, and why are they so rare nowadays? Well, we don't know exactly. It appears that in some isolated areas, like on islands, they continued to exist and survive until recent times, and on the mainland, they were incorporated and intermixed with other human groups to a degree. But they contribute relatively little to today's gene pool, and it appears that they largely disappeared from the Earth entirely. One of the leading theories is that on the mainland, some kind of catastrophe in prehistory caused these people simply to die out from who knows what, disease or scarcity, or maybe something more sinister. It is possible these people were the victims of a prehistoric genocide of sorts, murdered by other human groups and then replaced, but who knows? All we know is that the populations on islands were spared whatever this fate was, and Asia eventually became populated by other human groups.
I have a feeling that you really know, sir, but let's go ahead and move forward. Let me scroll back a little bit.
Were the victims of a prehistoric genocide of sorts, murdered by other human groups and then replaced, but who knows? All we know is that the populations on islands were spared whatever this fate was, and Asia eventually became populated by other human groups. The East Asians we see today probably weren't the original inhabitants of the region, but the true original inhabitants were these lost humans belonging to Y haploid group D. The members of haploid group D we see today are relics, the legacy of a now largely extinct Black Asians who called this region home before anyone else. Hey guys, this is a post-recording edit, so after looking back I'd like to make a minor correction. There's a lot of debate on this subject, and it's a bit gray at the moment. D may or may not have been the first group to enter Asia. There's a lot of scientists that do support D being the first, but there's also others that support C being the first. Y haploid group C, the group that largely includes Australian Aboriginals and Pacific Islanders and has very faint traces in the rest of Asia, is also said to have migrated into Asia around the same time, or maybe even slightly before D, give or take a few thousand years. Either way, both groups preceded O, which most East Asians nowadays belong to. Nonetheless, D would have been among Asia's first, if not the first, human inhabitants. As a side note, C's modern distribution is similarly gap-like in East Asia compared to D, and this suggests a similar dying off of some kind happened to them as well.
Alright, so what he just said is something that I brought out in my Russia video, and what is it? Well, the racial history of man, page 243. It should show up on your screen right now. But remember what it said? It said that, the time period is the Neolithic age. And it says that human distribution at a period roughly synchronous with the Neolithic period in Europe may dimly be seen. At this time, the southern and eastern borderlands from India around to Kamchatka seem to have been occupied in the main by a dolichocephalic dark-skinned Negroid population, which was a blend in varying proportions of the Proto-Australoid and Proto-Negroid types. There is some evidence that leads us to believe that this Negroid population extended farther westward than India. Okay, I read that part already, but I mean, all of this is in agreement with one another. So let's go ahead and proceed with this video.
It appears several independent waves of humans migrated out of Africa and into Asia. Group D was among the first to migrate into Asia and did so entirely independent from other Asian groups like C or F. And the reason why the Jomon, Ainu, and Namishi people don't really meet any of our modern racial classifications, such as having completely different eye shapes, facial structure, and so on, compared to people in Asia, is because they took an entirely independent evolutionary path from anybody else. So, who is this man and where does he come from? Well, he is the descendant of an ancient branch of early humanity. His ancestors broke off from the others very early on. They left Africa probably before anyone else. They ended up in Japan, and his ancestors mixed somewhat with the other newer Asians who had replaced his kin on the mainland.
So really, Y haplogroup D and C among others, you know, I don't have concrete evidence that other peoples were coming in, but I know D and C, those are the main ones, and that's my story. I'm sticking with it or sticking to it. So, what is it? Y haplogroup N and O, they came on the scene much later. So, D and C, Y haplogroup people were the originals.
Over the centuries, his people isolated themselves and retained their ancestral traits, and, well, here we are today. Almost all this history was left completely unrecorded by humanity. It was mainly genetic evidence that was the only way we have been able to at least glimpse these events that occurred in our distant past. I know this is sounding like some we was Kangs conspiracy stuff, but this is all true and supported by the evidence. For the longest time, human populations were classified.
Did you hear that? Why they have to do that, man? They hate history, bro. That's why they make fictitious history. The Palito, the Stankasians, they hate true history, man. You sound like you see that disparagement and denigration that he just put in his video. I mean, you was doing so well, bro. But yeah, staying on code, I guess. Let me scroll back a little bit.
Probably before anyone else. They ended up in Japan, and his ancestors mixed somewhat with the other newer Asians who had replaced his kin on the mainland. Over the centuries, his people isolated themselves and retained their ancestral traits, and, well, here we are today. Almost all this history was left completely unrecorded by humanity. It was mainly genetic evidence that was the only way we have been able to at least glimpse these events that occurred in our distant past. I know this is sounding like some we was Kangs conspiracy stuff, but this is all true and supported by the evidence. For the longest time, human populations were classified as incredibly distinct and clear-cut, but we now know it's a lot bigger. The case of the Ainu people shows us that humans, and all living things for that matter, have a very complex ancestry, and all of us have just as weird and intricate evolutionary histories from which we got our genes. It is fascinating to think what else is hidden in humanity's prehistory. What other branches and peoples existed back then, with their stories no longer visible in our modern world? And on that almost anticlimactic note, thanks for watching. I hope you learned something new, because I certainly did. Tell me what you thought about this evolution discussing us humans. I find human evolution and human diversity fascinating, and I'd hope to talk more about it in the future. So tell me if you enjoyed it, or not. Alright? See you guys, and I'll hopefully see you next time. Maybe later this month. It'll all depends.
All right, so I'm not a biased person here. I just follow the trends of truth. Now, let me go ahead and post up and highlight a pretty mature conversation. And that's surprising because, you know, Metatron's audience is shaky like that. But check this dude out here. What's his name? Rare Rakin 4007. He says that, you know, basically this reminds me of a comment I read on Facebook where a commenter wrote that Filipinos are black or melanated. They don't want to admit it because of shame and racism. So he said that many people agreed with the commenter, but he was floored. So he said Filipinos are Malay. Few of us have Chinese ancestry, and even fewer have European ancestry. But I have never read in our history books or studies that say we are predominantly African. And that's the problem right there. Nobody's saying that you guys are predominantly African or recent African ancestry. Where the argument is this here, that most of the world was melanated people. The original peoples of the world were melanated. Every continent, right before changes start happening to the gene pool. Now, I definitely want to give props to JM Gonzalez 7701. He says that, basically, as a Filipino, I have to correct just a bit of what you said. Filipinos aren't Malay, it's been debunked already. Then he goes on to say that our ancestors came from Taiwan and migrated first to the Philippines, and in our northern area is the most genetically related to the native Taiwanese. So in reality, we are the closest people to the Austronesians of Taiwan. So we aren't Malay, and we didn't come from Malays. All right, I'm gonna skip the rest of that and go straight to Rare Rakin 4007's rebuttal to JM Gonzalez. He said that thanks for the correction, I forgot the Austronesian part. And then he tells about his recollection of second grade geography or science or biology, where it said that the Filipinos are of the Gredo Malay and a third genetic origin. So he said that it's 24 years ago, and hopefully they updated it, and it was pretty cordial. That's what I thought. That's what I wanted to highlight. It wasn't no mudslinging and dragging melanated people through the mud, because the long-time trend of randomly mentioning melanated people, aka black people. Social media has a tendency to give people an adrenaline rush and just have like a bash fest when it comes to this type of thing. Some random event can happen. Somebody could get into a car wreck and they're like, oh, them black people. It's just random stuff, man, that has nothing to do with anything. So kudos to them for upholding some civility when the door was wide open to have a bash fest, because we've already seen commenters in this video take shots. We've already seen a scared African act like Toby. Not me, I'm one of the good ones, boss. That's not me's, that's them's, boss. Now let me put out a true disclaimer, man. I said scared African. We got scared Americans that be out here too, trying to separate themselves or show themselves to be one of the quote unquote good ones, the ones that don't rock the boat. They're everywhere. They're in the Caribbean, South America, Central America, Australia, so on and so forth. So here's a quick exercise here. We went from this to that. This melanated man to this lighter man. These melanated brothers to this lighter person. The argument is not what they are now, but what they were in the past. Who do you see as you go up the family tree? That's the entire point right here. And why haven't you recovered from your melanin allergy yet? It's still here like a flu. All right, so that's the conclusion of this Ainu video. I'm kind of done on the Ainu right now. I'm going to move on to other similar groups, but I will continue to build on this entire subject. All right, guys, later.